His name is Dan Smith. He's from the Springfield College class of 1960, although he's an older student than many of his classmates because he served in the Korean War, and then there was some time, even after he got back, before he came here. So I think he graduated from high school in 1952 and came to Springfield in the fall of 1956. Dan is someone who had a very good run here at Springfield College. He was an accomplished student and a student athlete and the president of the student council and president of the junior class, very popular student. Dan was one of the few African-American students on campus at the time that he was here. And the first thing that sort of strikes me as a writer about Dan is that he has an extraordinary lineage. And that is this, that Dan is the son of someone born into slavery. Seems almost mathematically impossible. I think if we all go back a few generations to try to get to the 1860s in our own families, we'd have to go through several generations. In Dan's case, his dad, Abram Smith, was born in 1863 and sired Dan almost at the age of 70. He married a much younger woman, and so Dan was born in 1932, and he's 88 years old right now. And so remarkably, he is just one generation removed from slavery. His father was born in the last few years of the Civil War, was technically the property of a white man down in Virginia. And that alone, just sort of mathematically, biologically, it's fascinating. But the story of Dan is much deeper, and I think much more important than that curiosity. Sure, the genesis of this really was my interest in Dr. King's commencement speech at Springfield College in 1964, June 14th. It's a story that's now been widely told. I think it's a remarkable moment, not just of Springfield College history, but really of American history. And my interest in that got me very interested in the March on Washington, August 28th, 1963. And I thought it would be interesting to have an event here on campus if I could find some people who had attended the March on Washington. I was able to track down 3 people, Barry Brooks from the class of 1964, who was graduating that next year, so he was about to enter his senior year. Bob Parsonage, who was the campus pastor at the time and got very involved in civil rights, as a number of religious figures on campuses did. And Dan, as an alum, as I mentioned, he had graduated in 1960, and he was working as a social worker down in Connecticut. And a friend of his was talking about the March on Washington, and they debated whether or not to go. They wound up going there, and it was this enormous event where you see this son of someone born into slavery listening to these words of Martin Luther King at the Lincoln Memorial, the great emancipator there. And so I was thrilled to have Dan come up for that event, and that's when we first met. And so I reconnected with Dan and did so actually on Sunday, June 14th, 2020, which, among other things, is Flag Day and is the anniversary of Dr. King's commencement speech on this campus. So it seemed an appropriate day, and we had this magnificent conversation. And I asked him about a number of moments in his past. He's been everywhere. So some of the highlights of Dan's long journey, and please, I encourage people to read the story if you want a more comprehensive look at Dan's story. But Dan was born and raised in a small town in western Connecticut, Winsted, Connecticut, just about an hour from the Springfield College campus. As one of the only African-American members of that community, grew up in great poverty. His father, who worked as a janitor, died when Dan was 6. His mom was raising 6 kids. Everybody had to work long, long hours, including Dan. There are some searing stories of his encounters with sort of Northern-style racism, although I think he regards his upbringing mostly as a very, very positive experience in Winsted. from his young days growing up in Winstead and some of his encounters with some really anguished moments of racism as a young person, coming onto the Springfield College campus, where I think his experience was overwhelmingly very, very positive here. And he has a great love for this institution, and he's been a very loyal alum. He was a member of the Board of Trustees. You know, he has a tremendous fondness for Springfield, and I think believes that this was an important part of his life journey too. But even well beyond that, when Dan went down to Alabama, where he worked for a few years in civil rights, down in Lowndes County, which was a notoriously racist area where 80% of the population was black and 0% of the voters were black. And Dan walked with Dr. King in the famous Selma to Montgomery March after Bloody Sunday on the Edmund Pettus Bridge when John Lewis was attacked. So we had major moments there, and then for the last 50 plus years living in Washington, D.C., where he has had numerous deep, fascinating encounters with consequential moments. You know, he described bursting into tears while attending Barack Obama's first inauguration, going to the installation of Desmond Tutu as the Archbishop of Cape Town. So he's lived this over-the-top, extraordinary life, but you'd never know it really by talking with Dan, because he has not been someone who has put his story out there as anything all that important. Yet I believe it is fundamentally important. I think that this is a lens through which people can see that the race story is the fundamental American story, that it's a long, long story. And I think that we can gain some tremendous insight and inspiration from Dan. And I'm hoping to be able to connect Dan Smith with our campus again more deeply. And so I think my biggest hope with a story like this one is it encourages people to walk the walk. It encourages people to be inspired by someone like Dan, who has done that for his whole life, who continues to do that at age 88. You know, if that were to be the case, this to me would be just a great success.